My name is Sofia Rodriguez, 29 years old, standing in the third row at my brother Carlos's police memorial service. Dad had positioned our family carefully, him and Mom in the front, my aunt and uncle behind them, and me tucked away where the support staff belongs, as he had put it that morning. "Remember, Mija," he whispered as we entered the church, adjusting his retired sergeant's uniform. "Today is about Carlos, our hero. You just blend in." I nodded silently, feeling the weight of my DEA badge hidden beneath my black blazer. Nobody in my family knew what I really did for a living. To them, I was just Sofia, the dispatcher who answered phones for some government office. That carefully constructed lie was about to shatter in the most public way possible. Growing up Rodriguez meant one thing. You were destined for law enforcement. Our family tree read like a police roster spanning 3 generations. My grandfather, Eduardo Rodriguez, joined the LAPD in 1963, walking the beat in East LA for 31 years. Dad followed exactly in his footsteps, joining the academy at 19 and working his way up to sergeant before retirement. By the time I was born, the Rodriguez name carried respect in every precinct from downtown to the valley. "Rodriguez men run toward the gunfire while others run away," Dad would say during dinner, his badge always placed ceremoniously beside his plate. "It's in our blood, Mija. Service and sacrifice." Carlos, older than me by 3 years, absorbed every word like scripture. From the moment he could walk, he wanted to be exactly like Dad. His childhood bedroom was a shrine to law enforcement, toy police cars, plastic badges, and a junior officer costume he wore until it literally fell apart. When career day came around in elementary school, Carlos showed up in Dad's old uniform shirt that hung past his knees like a dress. I loved my brother fiercely. Carlos was my protector, my confidant, and often my translator when Dad's expectations became too complex for me to understand. While Carlos embraced the visible, heroic aspects of police work that Dad celebrated, I found myself drawn to the puzzle-solving side of law enforcement. "Why can't I ride in the patrol car too?" I asked Dad when I was 8, watching him take Carlos on a weekend ride-along. "Because Carlos is going to be an officer someday," Dad replied without looking up from his case files. "He needs to learn how it works." "I want to be an officer too," I declared, standing as tall as my small frame would allow. Dad finally glanced up, his expression mixing amusement with dismissal. "Girls can be officers, sure. But you're too analytical. Too much in your head. Real police work happens on the streets, Mija, not behind a computer screen." That phrase, real police work, became the measuring stick against which every career choice in our family was judged. And by that standard, anything I showed interest in fell short. My mother, Elena Rodriguez, tried to soften these interactions. A nurse who had met Dad when she treated an officer he brought to the ER, she understood both the adrenaline of emergency response and the quiet, methodical work that happened behind the scenes. "Your father just wants you to be safe," she would explain after particularly difficult conversations about my future. "He's seen what happens on the streets. But he lets Carlos do it," I would counter. "That's different," she would say, though she could never quite explain how. The defining moment came during my senior year of high school. I had been accepted to UC San Diego with a scholarship to study criminology and psychology. The same week, Carlos graduated from the police academy. At dinner that night, Dad raised his glass in a toast. To Carlos, continuing the Rodriguez tradition of real police work. Academy today, detective shield tomorrow. Everyone clinked glasses. No mention was made of my acceptance until Mom gently prompted, "And Sofia has some news too." "Oh, right," Dad said, as if just remembering. "San Diego, wasn't it? Good school. Criminology program?" "I want to work in narcotics investigation," I added, hoping this focus might finally earn his approval. "Maybe federal law enforcement eventually." Dad chuckled. "Federal? Big dreams. Well, college is good. You can always get a job as a crime analyst or dispatcher if the fancy degree doesn't work out. Support roles are important too." In that moment, I understood my place in the Rodriguez family hierarchy. Carlos was the heir to the legacy, the one who would carry the badge with honor. I was the backup plan, the support staff, the one whose contribution would always be qualified as important to rather than simply important. Despite this, Carlos never treated me as secondary. "They just don't get it, Sofia," he told me the night before I left for college. "You're going to outrank all of us someday. Just don't forget the little people when you're running some task force." His faith in me never wavered, even when my own faltered. But neither of us could have predicted how prophetic his words would become. After graduating from UC San Diego with honors, I faced the reality that my academic achievements meant little to my family without an accompanying badge and uniform. In a moment of strategic calculation, or perhaps weakness, I applied for a position as a police dispatcher in my hometown. "Now that's practical," Dad said when I told him, the first genuine approval I'd heard regarding my career choices. "Good benefits, close to home, and you'll learn how real police work functions from the inside." For 18 months, I sat behind the dispatch console, coordinating responses and managing emergency communications. The work was important but unfulfilling for someone with my training. I found myself analyzing call patterns in my spare time, creating maps of incident types and frequencies that nobody had asked for. It was one of these unsolicited analyses that changed everything. "You created this?" asked Lieutenant Morrison, studying the detailed breakdown of drug-related calls I had compiled, showing clear patterns pointing to distribution networks spanning multiple jurisdictions. "Just something I noticed," I replied, suddenly self-conscious about overstepping my role. "This is exactly what the Regional Narcotics Task Force has been trying to piece together for months," he said, looking at me with new interest. "Where did you learn to do this kind of analysis?" Within weeks, my reports were being shared with agencies across county lines. Though officially still just a dispatcher, I was quietly being consulted on investigative strategies. One such report made its way to the DEA field office in Los Angeles. Special Agent Diana Martinez contacted me on a Thursday afternoon. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'd like to discuss your analytical work over coffee," she said, offering few details. 2 days later, sitting in a quiet cafe 30 miles from my hometown, I learned that the DEA had been tracking the same networks my analysis had identified. "Your educational background combined with your practical experience is impressive," Agent Martinez said. "Have you ever considered applying to the DEA?" 4 months later, I received official acceptance to the DEA Academy in Quantico. Standing in my apartment with a letter in hand, I faced the first major decision of my career: tell my family the truth or maintain a cover that would avoid the inevitable disappointment for my father. I chose the path of least resistance. "I'm transferring to a federal dispatch position," I told them over Sunday dinner. "Better pay, more responsibility." Dad nodded approvingly. "Government benefits are solid. Good career move." "Will you be home for Christmas?" Mom asked, more concerned with practicalities than prestige. "Hopefully they give you some vacation time," Carlos added, the only one to offer congratulations. Only as I was leaving did Dad deliver his parting assessment. "At least Carlos is doing something important. Not everyone is cut out for the front lines." I smiled tightly and said nothing, already mentally packing for Quantico. The DEA training was rigorous, challenging me physically and mentally in ways that finally felt fulfilling. I excelled in investigative techniques, surveillance operations, and tactical procedures. By graduation, I had been recruited for a specialized unit focusing on Mexican cartel operations along the West Coast. Over the next 5 years, I rose through the ranks, eventually leading a team focused on the Sinaloa cartel's distribution networks throughout California. The classified nature of my work provided perfect cover for the vague explanations I gave my family about my dispatch management position. "She works with computers for the government," I once overheard Dad tell a former colleague at a family barbecue. "Not exciting stuff, but it pays the bills." Carlos knew the truth. During a case that brought me near our hometown, I had confided in him over drinks. "Holy shit, Sofia," he had whispered, eyes wide. "You're like a real-life undercover agent." "Not undercover," I corrected. "Special agent. Narcotics division." "Does Dad know?" I shook my head. "And he can't. Not yet. Most of my work is classified." Carlos understood without further explanation. Your secret's safe with me. But someday, I want to be there when he finds out. His face will be priceless. That promise became a private joke between us, a future moment we both looked forward to under better circumstances. Neither of us could have imagined how that revelation would actually occur. Within my DEA team, I found the respect and recognition that had been absent in my family life. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, my direct supervisor, valued my analytical mind and cultural insights. My colleagues looked to me for guidance on complex cartel cases. Rodriguez has a sixth sense for when something doesn't add up, became a common refrain in our office. For the first time, I felt fully valued for my actual skills rather than measured against some arbitrary standard of real service. The irony that I had found this validation by hiding a significant part of my identity from my family wasn't lost on me. The only shadow over this period of professional growth was the increasing distance between my true self and the version my family knew. Holiday visits became exercises in careful omission. Questions about my work were deflected with vague references to dispatch protocols and communication systems. Only with Carlos could I occasionally share genuine stories, carefully scrubbed of classified details, but still recognizable as the work of an agent rather than a dispatcher. These rare moments of authenticity made the broader deception bearable. Then came the call that would shatter everything, both my carefully constructed dual life and our family itself. The call came at 2:23 a.m. on a Wednesday. I remember checking the time on my phone, the glowing numbers disorienting me as I reached for the device. Unknown numbers at this hour usually meant work, a development in a case that couldn't wait until morning. Instead, I heard my mother's voice, shattered and barely recognizable. Sofia, you need to come home. It's Carlos. He's gone. The world tilted on its axis. Gone? What do you mean gone? A drug bust went wrong. He was shot. Her voice broke completely. He didn't make it. The next hours passed in a blur of automated actions. Calling my supervisor to request emergency leave. Booking the first flight to Los Angeles. Packing a bag with no memory of what I put in it. Somewhere in this mechanical sequence, details began filtering through. Carlos had been part of a multi-agency operation targeting a major distribution hub connected to the Sinaloa cartel. The same cartel my team had been tracking for the past 18 months. As the plane descended into LAX, a sickening realization settled over me. I knew details about this operation that even Carlos's direct superiors might not have known. Intelligence my team had gathered had likely informed the raid that took my brother's life. Information that, due to compartmentalization protocols, I had never been able to share with him. Landing in Los Angeles, I rented a car for the drive home, using the 90 minutes to compose myself and prepare for the role I would need to play. Grieving sister, yes, but not DEA Agent Rodriguez, who had insight into the broader operation. Just Sofia, the dispatcher, returning home for her brother's funeral. The family home looked exactly as it always had, American flag flying, Carlos's patrol car in the driveway alongside Dad's truck. Mom met me at the door, her face aged a decade in a day. We held each other without words, the shared grief too vast for language. Dad sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by photographs of Carlos in uniform, methodically organizing them into what I would later learn was a display for the memorial service. He looked up briefly when I entered. "You made good time," he said before returning to his task. No hug, no shared grief, just a practical acknowledgement of my arrival time. "How are you holding up, Dad?" I asked, setting my bag down. "Doing what needs to be done," he replied without looking up. Carlos deserves a proper service, one that honors his sacrifice. The word sacrifice hung in the air between us. In our family lexicon, it had always been reserved for those on the front lines, those doing real police work. Now it had taken on a terrible, new meaning. "The department is handling most of the arrangements," he continued. "Full honors, as befits an officer fallen in the line of duty." The chief asked if I wanted to say a few words as his father. He paused. "Of course, you'll be mentioned as family, but keep in mind there will be a lot of officers wanting to speak about working with him. His real colleagues." And there it was, the familiar diminishment. Even in grief, even after flying across the country to mourn my only brother, I was still secondary. Still not quite belonging to this world he had built. I understand, I said quietly, too exhausted to challenge him. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity. The memorial service had expanded beyond original plans, with officers from departments across the state planning to attend. Carlos had been popular, his work on the narcotics task force respected across jurisdictions. While Dad coordinated with the police department, I found myself handling civilian aspects, notifying distant relatives, arranging accommodations for out-of-town guests, selecting music that Carlos would have liked. Mom moved through these days in a fog of grief, functioning but barely present. On the evening before the service, I found the memorial program on the kitchen counter. Flipping through it, I noticed my name appeared only once, in the list of surviving family members. I wasn't included among those presenting tributes, despite the chief's apparent inquiry about family speakers. When I asked Dad about this omission, his response was immediate and defensive. The program was getting too long. We had to prioritize those who served with him. I'm his sister, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. His only sibling. And you'll be recognized as such, he replied. But the memorial is about honoring his service as an officer. I thought you would understand that. Before I could respond, his phone rang, another call about arrangements. As he stepped away to take it, I stood alone in the kitchen, familiar isolation settling over me. Even in death, Carlos remained the son who mattered most. That night, my DEA phone vibrated with a message from Agent Torres. Intelligence suggests cartel retaliation possible. Security assessment required for memorial. Call ASAP. Slipping outside to the backyard of my childhood home, I returned the call, keeping my voice low. What do we know? I asked without preamble. Carlos's team got closer than anyone realized, Torres explained. The bust wasn't random. They were about to expose a direct pipeline from Sinaloa to the West Coast. Our intelligence suggests cartel representatives might attend the memorial for surveillance purposes. My blood ran cold. You think they'd make a move at a police funeral? Not an attack, Torres clarified. Information gathering. Identifying officers connected to the investigation. Standard cartel procedure when they lose a major hub. I'll keep my eyes open, I promised, the professional agent temporarily overtaking the grieving sister. We're sending a team, Torres added. Plain clothes, low profile. Just as precaution. After ending the call, I stood in the dark yard where Carlos and I had played as children, where he had taught me to ride a bike, where we had shared secrets under summer stars. Now I would attend his memorial not just as his sister, not just as the family afterthought, but as DEA Agent Rodriguez, watching for cartel observers, and no one could know. Dad's instructions the next morning only reinforced the role I was expected to play. Stay in the background today, he said as we prepared to leave for the church. This will be emotional for everyone. The less disruption, the better. The subtext was clear. Don't embarrass us. Don't draw attention. Know your place. For the first time since receiving news of Carlos's death, I felt something break through the numb shock of grief. A spark of anger, familiar but usually suppressed, flickered to life. But today was about Carlos. I would play my part, stand where I was told to stand, say what little I was permitted to say. I would honor my brother. And I would watch the crowd for faces that didn't belong, for eyes that studied rather than grieved, for the cartel presence that my family would never know to look for. As we drove to the church, I thought about the last conversation I had with Carlos, just 2 weeks earlier. We had met for dinner while I was in LA for a case I couldn't tell him about. Someday, he had said as we parted, Dad's going to learn what you really do. And when that happens, I want front row seats to that show. It would certainly make family dinners more interesting, I had replied. I'll help him understand, Carlos promised. When the time is right. Now that time would never come. Or so I thought. The memorial service for Officer Carlos Rodriguez was held at St. Augustine's Cathedral, the largest church in our city. By 9 a.m., the parking lot overflowed with patrol cars from departments across Southern California. A sea of blue uniforms moved solemnly up the church steps, each officer's badge wrapped with a thin black band of mourning. Our family arrived through a side entrance, ushered in by the police chaplain and the department's honor guard. Carlos's casket had already been positioned at the front of the church, draped with the American flag, his dress uniform hat and white gloves placed precisely on top. The sight hit me with physical force, making Carlos's death real in a way the preceding days had not. Dad moved with rigid military bearing, his face expressionless save for the muscle occasionally twitching in his jaw. Mom leaned heavily on my arm, her grief too vast to be contained by the stoic Rodriguez family tradition. I guided her gently to the front pew reserved for immediate family, scanning the gathering crowd with both the eyes of a mourning sister and the trained awareness of a DEA agent. As we took our seats, Dad positioned himself, placing Mom between us. Whether this was coincidental or a deliberate buffer, the effect was the same. I sat at the end of the family row, partially separated from them. The physical arrangement perfectly mirrored our emotional reality. "Remember, keep it together," Dad murmured to both of us, though his eyes rested longer on me. "Today is about honoring Carlos's sacrifice properly." The service began with the posting of colors by the police honor guard, followed by the national anthem. Throughout the opening ceremonies, I continued my discreet surveillance of the attendees. Most were clearly law enforcement or family friends, their grief genuine and visible. But 4 men in dark suits, sitting separately in different sections, triggered my professional instincts. Their attention seemed focused less on the service and more on cataloging the officers in attendance. The eulogies began with Carlos's police chief, who spoke of dedication and ultimate sacrifice. Following him was Carlos's partner, Detective Ryan Walsh, whose composed recounting of their last conversation broke only once, when describing how Carlos had shown him pictures from my recent visit. "He was so proud of his sister," Walsh said, glancing toward our family pew. "Always talking about how smart she was, how she was going to do big things someday." I felt Dad stiffen beside Mom at this unexpected mention, this deviation from the narrative of Carlos as solely belonging to the police brotherhood. Next came Dad's turn at the podium. Drawing himself to his full height, the retired sergeant addressed the gathering with the authority of both professional rank and paternal grief. "My son followed in a proud tradition of Rodriguez men who have worn the badge," he began, his voice steady. "3 generations of service, of running toward danger while others run away." He spoke of Carlos's childhood determination to become an officer, his graduation from the academy, his rapid rise through the ranks. Every anecdote reinforced the central theme. Carlos was a true Rodriguez, doing the real work of law enforcement. He leaves behind his mother Elena, who supported his dangerous career with a quiet courage only a police wife understands, Dad continued, and his sister Sofia, who works as a dispatcher in the federal system. That was it. My entire existence and contribution to the family legacy summed up in a partial job description. Not even accurate, but close enough in Dad's mind to not warrant further detail. As Dad returned to his seat, I fought to maintain my composed expression. The familiar hurt mingled with my grief, creating a toxic brew that threatened to overflow. Mom reached for my hand, perhaps sensing my struggle, but Dad immediately required her attention, asking for a tissue. The service continued with more tributes from fellow officers. From my position, I could see the 4 men I had noticed earlier shifting positions, moving to different vantage points around the periphery of the church. Their behavior confirmed my suspicions. They were cataloging faces, particularly those of plainclothes detectives who might be involved in ongoing investigations. During a hymn, I discreetly sent a text to Torres's team, describing the suspects' positions and movements. Seconds later, I received confirmation. Identified. Known associates. Team in position. As the formal service transitioned to the presentation of Carlos's badge to our mother, the church doors at the back opened quietly. 5 men and women entered, their dark suits and subtle earpieces identifying them immediately to my trained eye, though they would appear as merely late attendees to civilians. The DEA team had arrived. Agent Torres herself led the group, her eyes scanning the room until they found me. A slight nod conveyed all I needed to know. They had identified the cartel observers and were monitoring the situation. Dad was now receiving the folded flag that had draped Carlos's casket, his face finally betraying emotion as he clutched the triangular package to his chest. In this moment of vulnerability, I felt my anger soften. Whatever our differences, his grief was as real as mine. The final speaker was the mayor, who announced the posthumous awarding of the Medal of Valor to Officer Carlos Rodriguez. As he invited our family to stand for recognition, Dad motioned for me to remain seated. "Just immediate family for this part," he whispered. I felt as though I had been slapped. "I am immediate family," I responded, loud enough that several nearby officers turned to look. Dad's expression hardened. "Don't make a scene, Sofia. Not today." Something in me finally broke. The cumulative weight of years of being diminished, combined with grief and professional tension, pushed me past my normal threshold of compliance. I stood anyway, taking my place beside my mother as the mayor presented the medal. From this new vantage point, I had a clear view of the cartel observers. One was now openly photographing the ceremony with a small camera, ostensibly as any attendee might, but with his lens focused more on the gathered officers than the proceedings. At that moment, Agent Torres made direct eye contact with me from across the church. A subtle gesture indicated she needed to speak with me. The team was ready to move. As the formal portion of the memorial service concluded and attendees began to move toward the reception area, I felt the familiar tension of operating in two worlds simultaneously. The grieving sister needed to stay with family, accepting condolences and honoring Carlos's memory. The DEA agent needed to respond to Torres' signal and address the security threat that most people in the room were completely unaware of. Dad's voice cut through my internal conflict. "We'll receive condolences as a family," he instructed, positioning himself and Mom at the head of a receiving line. "Sofia, perhaps you could help with the guest book. Make yourself useful somewhere in the back." The dismissal was so practiced, so casual in its diminishment, that under normal circumstances I would have complied automatically. But these were not normal circumstances. "I'll be right back," I said instead. "I need to speak with someone first." Dad's face darkened. "Now is not the time for networking, Sofia. Show some respect." "This isn't about networking," I replied, keeping my voice low. "This is about Carlos." Before he could respond, I moved away, weaving through the crowd toward where I had last seen Agent Torres. Several officers I didn't recognize stopped me with kind words about Carlos, each interaction slowing my progress and increasing my anxiety about the developing situation. I spotted Torres near the side entrance, engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation with one of her team members. As I approached, her expression remained neutral, but I recognized the tension in her stance. "We have positive identification on 4 Sinaloa associates," she said without preamble when I reached her. "They're here gathering intelligence on the task force, documenting which officers from which jurisdictions are connected to the investigation." Standard cartel procedure, I agreed automatically, slipping into agent mode. "Are we moving on them?" "We need to do this carefully," Torres cautioned. "Lot of armed officers here. Emotional situation. The last thing we want is a confrontation inside a memorial service." I nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. "What do you need from me?" "Local cooperation. These officers don't know us, but they know you as Carlos's sister. We need someone to liaise with the ranking officers present, brief them discreetly, and coordinate a quiet extraction of the subjects." It was the logical move tactically, but it would mean revealing my true role to everyone present, including my father. After years of secrecy, the revelation would come in the most public and emotionally charged setting possible. "There's no other way?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Torres shook her head. "Not with this many jurisdictions present and this little time. One of the subjects just received a text and appears to be preparing to leave. We need to move now." Taking a deep breath, I nodded. "I'll speak with Captain Hernandez. He's the highest-ranking officer from Carlos's department." As I turned to find Hernandez, Torres placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry about the timing, Rodriguez. I know this isn't how you wanted your family to find out." The genuine concern in her voice nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. "Just doing the job, ma'am," I managed, the professional mask slipping back into place. I spotted Captain Hernandez speaking with a group of officers near Carlos's memorial display. As I approached, I became acutely aware of my father watching from across the room, his expression a mixture of confusion and disapproval at my apparent disregard for his instructions. Before I could reach Hernandez, however, events accelerated. One of the cartel observers had separated from the others and was moving rapidly toward an exit. Agent Stevens, part of Torres's team, was tracking him while appearing to examine a floral arrangement. Torres made a decisive gesture, and her team began converging from different points around the church. The movement was subtle but purposeful. Anyone with tactical training would recognize it immediately. Several officers did notice, their hands instinctively moving toward their service weapons. The potential for chaos escalated with each passing second. Torres strode directly toward me, no longer attempting to be discreet. In that moment, I knew what needed to happen. The careful separation of my two lives was about to end. As Torres reached me, she spoke clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "Agent Rodriguez, we need you now. Subjects are moving." The effect was immediate. Officers within earshot turned to stare. A ripple of confusion spread through the nearby mourners, and across the room, my father's face transformed into an expression I had never seen before: shock, stripped of all his carefully maintained control. "Captain Hernandez," I said, turning to Carlos's superior officer who had witnessed the exchange, "I'm Special Agent Sofia Rodriguez, DEA. Those 4 men in dark suits are cartel associates here gathering intelligence on officers involved in the task force that Carlos was part of. My team needs to remove them quietly without disrupting the memorial." To his credit, Hernandez processed this startling information quickly. "What do you need from us?" "A perimeter. Quiet containment. No visible movement that would alert them." Hernandez nodded immediately, signaling to his lieutenants while keeping his voice low. "Secure the exits. Plain clothes only. No uniforms approach the subjects." As Hernandez coordinated with his officers, I became aware of my father pushing through the crowd toward me, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. But there was no time to address the personal revelation. The operation had to come first. "Agent Rodriguez," Torres called. "We need your confirmation on the primary subject." I moved swiftly to join Torres near the side entrance, where one of the cartel observers was being discreetly contained by Stevens and another agent. The subject's eyes widened in recognition when he saw me, not as Carlos's sister, but as someone he recognized from surveillance photos. "Miguel Herrera," I confirmed quietly. "Mid-level Sinaloa lieutenant. Previously identified in the Riverside operation last year." The professional confirmation, delivered in front of dozens of police officers and my approaching father, permanently shattered any possibility of maintaining my cover. There was no going back now. Torres nodded. "We have the other 3 secured outside. Local DEA field office is sending transport." By now, my father had reached us, his face ashen. "Sofia, what is going on here? Who are these people?" Before I could respond, Torres extended her hand. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I'm Supervisory Special Agent Rebecca Torres, DEA. Your daughter is one of our most valuable agents. She's been instrumental in the larger investigation connected to the operation your son was involved in." Dad looked from Torres to me, decades of certainty crumbling before my eyes. "Your DEA?" "Actually, DA. For 5 years, Dad." I confirmed, the weight of the life finally lifting. "I couldn't tell you because of the classified nature of my work." Around us, officers who had known me only as Carlos's sister, the dispatcher, were processing this revelation with varying degrees of surprise. Detective Walsh actually laughed. "That explains a lot," he said. "Carlos always got weird when we asked too many questions about you. Said you were just a dispatcher, but it always felt like he was enjoying some private joke." The mention of Carlos brought the reality of the day crashing back. We were still at his memorial service. There would be time for personal reckonings later. "Captain Hernandez," I said, turning back to the operation at hand, We need to complete this extraction without disrupting the memorial further. My brother deserves that respect. Hernandez nodded immediately, refocusing on the tactical situation. With practiced efficiency, the remaining cartel observers were quietly escorted from the church through side exits, the operation conducted so discreetly that most attendees remained unaware anything had happened. As the immediate crisis resolved, I found myself standing face to face with my father in a moment neither of us had prepared for. The man who had spent decades dismissing my career choices, diminishing my contributions, and relegating me to the background now stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "All this time," he said finally, his voice barely audible, "you let me believe you were just a dispatcher." "You never asked for details, Dad," I replied gently. "You assumed, and it was easier to let you believe what you wanted than to fight for recognition." I wasn't allowed to explain. For perhaps the first time in my life, my father had no ready response. The carefully constructed hierarchy that had defined our family for decades had been upended in a matter of minutes, and he was still processing the implications. Officer after officer now approached, their earlier condolences replaced by professional respect and questions about my work. Each interaction seemed to further destabilize Dad's worldview as men and women whose service he deeply respected treated me as a peer, even looking to me with deference regarding the security situation. Mom made her way to my side, tears streaming down her face. "I always knew you were doing something important," she whispered as she embraced me. "Carlos told me a little, though he said he wasn't supposed to know either." "He figured it out," I admitted. "I swore him to secrecy." "He was so proud of you," she said. "He used to tell me, 'Mom, you have no idea how badass Sofia is.'" The use of Carlos's actual words broke through my professional composure. For the first time since arriving for the memorial, I allowed myself to truly feel the loss of my brother, not just as family, but as the one person who had known both versions of me and valued them equally. As the memorial service transitioned to its conclusion, I found myself in an entirely new position within the Rodriguez family narrative. No longer relegated to the background, I had become central to the unfolding story, not just as Carlos's sister, but as DEA Agent Rodriguez, whose work intersected with his final case in ways no one could have anticipated. Dad stood alone near Carlos's casket, his usual commanding presence diminished by shock and newfound uncertainty. For the first time, I recognized something in his expression that I had never seen directed toward me before: respect, tinged with confusion, and perhaps a dawning recognition of how profoundly he had misjudged his own daughter. With the cartel observers secured and transportation arranged, the immediate security threat had been neutralized. Torres pulled me aside as local DEA field agents took custody of the subjects. "We'll handle processing and initial interrogation," she assured me. "You should stay with your family. This is still your brother's memorial." I nodded gratefully. The compartmentalization that had served me professionally for years was now failing in the face of grief and emotional revelation. "Take the time you need, Rodriguez," she added. "The case will be waiting when you're ready to return." As Torres and her team departed, I turned back to the memorial service, which had continued despite the discreet operation at its periphery. Most attendees remained unaware that anything unusual had occurred, their focus appropriately on honoring Carlos. The same could not be said for the law enforcement officers present. Word had spread quickly through their ranks, and I found myself receiving nods of professional recognition from officers who had barely acknowledged me earlier. The transformation in how I was perceived was immediate and startling. Captain Hernandez approached as I rejoined my family. "Agent Rodriguez," he said formally, then softened his tone. "Sofia, I wish we had known." Carlos never indicated. "He was protecting my cover," I explained. Even family members are typically not informed about undercover assignments or classified operations. "Of course," Hernandez nodded understandingly. "I just want you to know that what you did today, putting operational needs above your personal situation, it's exactly what Carlos would have done. You two are more alike than I realized." His words struck a chord. Throughout my life, Carlos had been held up as the model Rodriguez, the one who embodied all the family values of service and sacrifice. To be seen as similar to him, particularly by his commanding officer, carried a validation I had never expected to receive. "Thank you, Captain," I managed, emotion threatening to break through my professional demeanor. Hernandez hesitated, then added, "There's something you should know. The task force Carlos was part of, we've been coordinating with federal agencies for months. The intelligence that informed our operation came from—" He paused. "Well, I now suspect it may have come from your team." The implication was clear and hit me with physical force. My team's intelligence had directly contributed to the operation that had cost Carlos his life. We did provide analysis to multi-jurisdictional task forces tracking Sinaloa distribution networks. I confirmed, the words feeling like ashes in my mouth. Operational details would have been sanitized before reaching local departments. Standard protocol. "I understand compartmentalization," Hernandez assured me. "I just thought you should know, your work and Carlos's were connected. You were fighting the same battle, just from different angles." As Hernandez moved away to oversee the transition to the cemetery portion of the service, I found myself standing alone, processing this new layer of connection and loss. The intelligence my team had gathered had helped shape the operation where Carlos died. In trying to protect him by keeping my work secret, I had actually been working alongside him all along. The irony was painful, yet somehow appropriate. Even separated by secrecy and different agencies, we had remained a team until the end. Dad approached hesitantly, his customary certainty replaced by an awkward tentativeness I had never witnessed in him before. "The service is moving to the cemetery," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "We should ride together. As a family." The simple inclusion, so automatic for most families but so meaningful in ours, felt like an olive branch extended across a chasm of misunderstanding. "I'd like that," I replied. The cemetery service proceeded with full police honors, the 21-gun salute, the playing of taps, the ceremonial folding and presentation of the flag. Throughout these solemn rituals, I remained hyper-aware of the subtle shift in my position within both the family and the larger law enforcement community present. Officers who had previously seen me only as Carlos's sister now approached with professional respect. Several quietly mentioned cases they had worked that had federal connections, suggesting points of professional intersection I had never been able to acknowledge before. "Your brother mentioned once that you had helped with the Moreno trafficking case," Detective Sanchez told me quietly. "Said he couldn't explain how or why he knew that. Makes sense now." These revelations created a strange dissonance. Grief for Carlos intermingled with a belated recognition of my own professional identity. The latter felt almost inappropriate under the circumstances, yet it was undeniably transformative. Years of being diminished were being rewritten in real time. Dad observed these interactions with an unreadable expression. The man who had spent decades confidently assessing and categorizing everyone's contributions now seemed lost, his framework for understanding his own family fundamentally altered. As the cemetery service concluded and attendees began to disperse, several of Carlos's closest colleagues gathered around our family to share more personal memories. Their stories revealed a side of my brother I had glimpsed but never fully known, his leadership on difficult cases, his mentorship of younger officers, his unwavering integrity. "He talked about you all the time," Officer Chin told me. "Always said his sister was the real brains of the Rodriguez family. But we could never figure out why a dispatcher would need that many advanced degrees." She smiled sadly. "He knew, didn't he? He figured it out." I confirmed. "Made me swear not to tell anyone that he knew." Classic Carlos, Walsh added. "Could keep a secret better than anyone." As the gathering thinned, Captain Hernandez approached our family once more. "We've organized a more informal reception at Carlos's favorite restaurant. Nothing official, just his close colleagues remembering him the way he would have wanted." Mom looked to Dad, who nodded. "We'll be there," he confirmed, speaking for all of us as he always had. As we walked back to the family car, Dad fell into step beside me, maintaining an unusual silence. Finally, as we reached the vehicle, he spoke. "I don't know what to say to you," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. 5 years, Sofia. 5 years of believing one thing about my own daughter, and now Now you know the truth, I finished. Or part of it, at least. Some of it will always be classified. He nodded slowly, processing this limitation. All those times I talked about real police work, about the front lines. His voice trailed off, the implicit apology hanging unspoken between us. We're all on the front lines now, Dad, I replied. Just different fronts in the same fight. For the first time that day, perhaps the first time in years, my father really looked at me. Not as his daughter who had chosen a support role, not as the family member who had strayed from the Rodriguez tradition, but as a professional whose service he was finally beginning to understand. Your brother knew, didn't he? He asked suddenly. Yes, I admitted. He figured it out about 2 years ago. Dad laughed unexpectedly, a sound startling in its genuineness. He always could read people better than me. Stubborn old cop, set in my ways. The momentary lightness faded. He was proud of you, Sofia. He told me that, though he never explained why. Said, someday you'll understand. As we drove to the restaurant, I looked out at the city where both Carlos and I had grown up, where we had forged such different paths that ultimately converged in ways none of us could have predicted. The grief remained overwhelming, but alongside it grew something new. A sense that Carlos's death, however tragic, had finally allowed the truth of my life to emerge from the shadows. The barriers that had separated the compartments of my existence were dissolving, bringing pain but also an unexpected liberation. For the first time since joining the DEA, I could begin to imagine a future where I wouldn't have to choose between my professional identity and my place in the Rodriguez family legacy. The days following Carlos's memorial service unfolded in a strange, new reality. The carefully maintained separation between my DEA identity and my family life had collapsed entirely, leaving us all to navigate unfamiliar terrain. Dad oscillated between periods of stunned silence and bursts of questions about my work, most of which I still couldn't fully answer. 5 years, he would repeat, the number becoming a measure of his failure to truly know his daughter. 5 years in the DEA, and I never suspected. Mom adjusted more readily. Perhaps because she had already suspected something beyond my dispatcher cover story. Carlos hinted at it. She admitted during a quiet moment alone. He said you were doing important work that you couldn't talk about. I assumed it was some kind of administrative security position. 3 days after the memorial, I sat with my father on the back porch of the family home. The evening was warm, the sun setting behind the same palm trees that had shaded our childhood games. Dad nursed a glass of the tequila he reserved for special occasions, its level notably lower than when he had started. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, the question that had clearly been weighing on him since the revelation. Was it really all classified, or was it? He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. It was both, I answered honestly. The work itself is classified, yes. But I also knew how you would react. Or thought I knew. How do you think I would have reacted? His voice held genuine curiosity rather than his usual defensiveness. With skepticism, I said. With questions about whether it was real DEA work or just some desk job with a fancy title. With comparisons to Carlos's more visible service. Dad winced, recognition flashing across his face. I would have done exactly that, wouldn't I? You had been doing it my entire life, Dad. Real police work happens on the streets. Remember that one? You said it every time I expressed interest in the investigative side of law enforcement. He looked down at his glass. I didn't realize how often I said that. Or how it sounded to you. It was your measuring stick, I explained. The standard against which all service was judged. And by that measure, anything I was interested in always fell short. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of misunderstanding settling between us. When Torres called you one of their most valuable agents, Dad said finally, was she just being diplomatic? Because of the circumstances? The question surprised me with its vulnerability.
No, he answered truthfully.
I lead a specialized analytical team focusing on cartel operations along the West Coast. My unit has been tracking the Sinaloa networks for the past year. The same people Carlos was investigating. I nodded. Different level, different angle, but yes. The intelligence my team gathered likely informed the operation Carlos was part of. Dad's expression shifted as he processed this connection. So you and Carlos were working the same case without even knowing it? That's how it works sometimes, I said. Compartmentalization keeps operations secure, but it also means the left hand doesn't always know what the right is doing. Could you have warned him? The question came suddenly, pain evident in his voice. If you had told him what you knew about these people, could it have made a difference? The question hit me with physical force, voicing the doubt that had haunted me since learning of Carlos's death. I've asked myself that every day since it happened, I admitted. The honest answer is, I don't know. Most of what my team knew was big picture, money flow, organizational structure, distribution patterns. The tactical details of his operation would have been handled at the local level. Dad nodded slowly, accepting this without the accusation I had feared. He was always careful, methodical. Whatever happened that day, I don't think it was because he lacked information. The absence of blame felt like absolution for a guilt I had been carrying silently. He was the best officer I knew, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Not just because he was my brother, but because he truly understood that good police work is about protecting people, not just making arrests. He learned that from you, I think, Dad said unexpectedly. All those arguments you two used to have about criminal justice reform, about community policing, he listened, even when it seemed like he was just arguing. This revelation, that I had influenced Carlos's approach to policing, just as he had supported my career path, created a new dimension to my grief. We had shaped each other in ways neither of us had fully acknowledged. There's something I need to show you, Dad said, rising with sudden purpose. He disappeared into the house, returning minutes later with a worn leather folder I recognized as his important documents case. Carlos gave me this about 4 months ago, he explained, extracting an envelope. Said I should only open it if something happened to him. I found it last night. He handed me the envelope, my name written on the front in Carlos's distinctive handwriting. With unsteady fingers, I opened it to find a letter and a small flash drive. Dear Sofia, the letter began. If you're reading this, something has gone sideways and Dad finally knows about your real job. Knowing him, he's struggling with it. So, I figured I'd help both of you out. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. I've been collecting evidence of your badassery for years. News articles about cases I know you worked on, redacted DEA commendations I dug up, that interview you gave disguised as a federal analyst for the Justice Department newsletter. It's all on the flash drive, organized and annotated for Dad's benefit. Consider it my gift to both of you. You get the recognition you deserve, and he gets to see what his daughter has really been doing while he thought she was answering phones. The letter continued with personal messages, inside jokes, and finally, I always knew you'd outrank me someday, Commandante. I just wish I could be there to see Dad's face when he figures it out. Love you, Carlos. I handed the letter to my father, watching as he read Carlos's words. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He made a whole presentation, Dad said, holding up the flash drive. Complete with video introduction. Said I should watch it if I ever needed to understand what real law enforcement looks like in the 21st century. The intentionality of Carlos's actions, preparing this material, anticipating both my need for recognition and Dad's need for concrete evidence, was so perfectly, painfully him. Even in death, he was trying to bridge the gap between his father and sister. We could watch it together, I suggested. When you're ready. Dad nodded carefully, returning the flash drive to the envelope. Not tonight, but soon. As darkness fell completely, we sat in a silence more comfortable than any I could remember sharing with my father. The reconciliation between us remained incomplete, the habits of a lifetime not easily changed. But Carlos's final gift had created an opening, a possibility for a new understanding. I need to return to work next week, I said eventually. The case is still active. The case connected to Carlos?
Yes.
Different aspects, higher-level targets, but connected. Dad considered this. Will you be able to tell me about it when it's over? Some of it, I said honestly. Not all, but more than before. He nodded, accepting these limitations in a way the old Sergeant Rodriguez never would have. I want to know what you can share about this case, about your work, he said. I've missed 5 years already. The acknowledgement of loss, not just of Carlos, but of the relationship we might have had if not for misunderstanding and secrecy, hung between us. It won't bring him back, I said softly. No, Dad agreed. But it might help us honor him properly. Both sides of his legacy, the visible service everyone saw, and the brother who supported his sisters in visible battles. 2 days later, I prepared to return to Los Angeles. My leave was ending, and the investigation needed my attention. The cartel members identified at the memorial had provided valuable intelligence under questioning, opening new avenues in our ongoing case. Mom hugged me tightly at the door. Be safe, she whispered, and call more often, even if you can't tell us everything. Dad stood awkwardly to the side, our new understanding still fragile and uncertain. As I turned to say goodbye, he surprised me by pulling me into an embrace. I'm proud of you, he said, the words I had waited decades to hear. Not because you're DEA instead of a dispatcher, but because you found your own way to serve, even when I couldn't see its value. Thank you, Dad. I managed, the simple acknowledgement more healing than I had anticipated. Carlos knew, he added as he released me. He understood what I'm only beginning to learn, that the Rodriguez legacy isn't about wearing a specific uniform or carrying a particular badge. It's about the commitment to service, whatever form that takes. As I drove away from my childhood home, grief and loss still dominated my emotional landscape. Carlos was gone. The brother who had been my ally and advocate since childhood, that hole would never be filled. But alongside the grief grew something unexpected, a sense of integration. The compartmentalized aspects of my identity were finally converging into a whole person. Agent Rodriguez and Sofia the sister were no longer separate entities, but facets of the same life. Returning to my team the following Monday, I found new purpose in the continuation of our investigation. The case that had tangentially cost Carlos's life was now personal in a way I had never allowed my work to become before. Welcome back, Agent Rodriguez. Torres greeted me as I entered our secure briefing room. Are you ready for this? I nodded, surveying the case files and intelligence reports spread across the table. More than ready, ma'am. Your brother's task force did good work, she said. Laid the groundwork for what we're doing now. I thought you should know that. I do know it, I replied. And I intend to finish what he started. The investigation would continue for months, eventually leading to the indictment of key cartel figures operating throughout the southwestern United States. Carlos's name would appear in the official reports alongside mine. Different agencies, different roles, but part of the same fight. On my desk at the DEA field office now sits a photograph of Carlos in his uniform, next to my federal credentials. No longer a secret to be hidden, but a shared legacy of service that took different forms but stemmed from the same source. Dad calls weekly now, asking what he can about my cases, accepting the limitations of classification, and slowly learning about the daughter he never truly knew. The reconciliation remains a work in progress, the habits of a lifetime not easily changed. But Carlos's final gift created a foundation for a new relationship built on mutual respect rather than measuring against a single standard of service. In the end, what my father finally understood, what Carlos had known all along, was that courage and sacrifice take many forms. Some are visible and celebrated with medals and ceremonies. Others remain in the shadows, unseen but no less vital. Both are necessary. Both are valuable. Both are real. Have you ever felt underestimated by family who didn't understand your true capabilities or contributions? I'd love to hear your stories of recognition delayed or denied in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more authentic experiences about finding validation in unexpected places. And if you know someone who might connect with this journey of being seen for who you truly are, share this video with them. Remember that true service isn't defined by visibility or titles, but by impact and commitment to something larger than yourself. Thank you for listening to my story today.